Cool. So welcome to the last session of the second day of the IFM conference, and welcome to IFM History as we go into the inaugural book session of the IFM conference, Texts and Contexts, New Books, Writing and Publishing, where we have published authors who present their latest books to the IFM community. So this is all hot off the press stuff, right? So I'm Jenna Ng. I'm a facilitator for this session. I'm Professor of Digital Media and Culture at the University of York, UK. And I'm really thrilled to be chairing this session because A, these books were chosen as works relevant to the IFM theme. So it's great to celebrate these publications at this conference in this venue. It's great to have a chance to hear the contents, the key arguments, and so on. But also as a committee, we curated this session to ask authors to share their personal journey in the book writing process. Writing a book is long and hard work. Oh my goodness, it is long and hard. So the IFM community, we want to celebrate these achievements with these authors of their books, both as an outcome, but also in recognition of the effort and the process behind the book, behind this work. So this session will spotlight 3 authors, each of whom will present succinctly over 7 to 9 minutes, aligning with our emphasis on dialogue. And I will give a 2-minute warning before the end of time by just waving my fingers like that. I suppose that will do. And so we have adjusted the program a little bit, and we will start with Marina. So Marina 𝗧𝗃𝗫𝗀 is Assistant Professor in the Department of Cinema Studies at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. She is the author of Interactive Cinema, The Ambiguous Ethics of Media Participation, which is a book she's presenting today, published by University of Minnesota Press. And she is the founder of various collaborative initiatives and resources, including ExpressiveAI.net, Interactive Media Archive, and the 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗏 Archive. So Marina, over to you for Interactive Cinema.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you to the organizing committee for this book launch. I'm excited to hear from the other authors as well. And I really appreciate the reflexive approach to the writing of the book, because actually how this project started was very rhizomatic. It was all over the place, and it was not in the form of linear writing. So it was in the form of a blog. And this is over a decade ago, where I was still a PhD student, and I had to really advocate for multilinear forms of scholarship, which now we take for granted, right? So part of the difficulty was putting everything together into a cohesive linear book. But after I give a brief kind of introduction of the actual book, I'll talk to you about ways of reconfiguring all the research that made it into the book, a lot of things that didn't make it into the book, into other multimodal forms, interactive forms, and so on. Because I think of the book kind of like to use a popular term, a living documentary. So I want to have a living book, an extended and augmented book, because the work is never finite. So I want to be very transparent about that. And I want to encourage others to also experiment with writing and to help expand the book publishing industry as well. So thankfully, I had a very supportive press, which is the University of Minnesota Press, that encouraged me to work on the extensions of the book and so on. And I don't have to, in this conference, to give you a whole prelude as to why interactivity and audience studies are important. So I'll just jump right in. So my book historicizes interactivity through the lens of cinematic participation, ranging from pre and early cinema to expanded cinema and contemporary multimedia context, to ultimately use interactive cinema as a springboard to talk about and interrogate contemporary notions of democracy and global citizenship in some very problematic and, as the title mentions, ambiguous contexts. So a large focus is on interactive experiments that emerged during periods of socio-political crisis and historical transitions. For instance, in authoritarian, totalitarian, post-communist context, there is a particular case study that focuses on the collapse of the Soviet Union, some contexts that have not yet been included completely in context of interactive cinema and participation, and also in conjunction with the emergence of new nationalisms in post-colonial, post-Soviet, and post-industrial contexts, where interactivity was used to interrogate liminal forms of identity and cultural transitions. So I cover specific case studies from areas that have not yet been fully historicized, such as the Balkans, and so on. And besides the objective of decentering some Western-centric narratives that usually associate interactivity with polarized ideas of either mass manipulation or user empowerment as democratization, some dichotomies that I feel have also restricted the cultural histories of computation and the digital humanities. Another aim is to propose a counter history of cinema by expanding its definition to include several variations of participatory spectatorship, including different sensory lenses, such as and taste, as well as disabilities, and also, which is very important, various materiality interactive cinema, including hardware, discs, net art, flash, mixed media, CD-ROM, that disrupt ocular-centric and sometimes anthropocentric ways of approaching film, and by extension, other media cultures. Now, part of my kind of transparent and self-reflexive methodology has to do with the issue that is very seldom dwelled upon, which is how to study and teach transient media, for instance, disappearing media, ephemeral media, and so on, when opportunities to experience or re-experience them are very limited. So the ephemerality of performance and or site-specific or hardware and software-specific interactive cinemas has led to fragmentary or superficial historical kind of reconstructions that typically contain very little analysis of the actual narrative content and its interactive aspects. So I bring back some traditional film studies methodologies and cultural studies methodologies that have to do with the close reading as a mode of preservation. So I do focus on more computational and digital humanities approaches, but I think it's also important to fuse those with more traditional methodologies, just to have a balance of the two. So part of my analysis therefore reflects on the difficulty of gaining access to such works and on the function of electronic traces in media historiography. Furthermore, through a rigorous analysis of digital interactive experiments, for instance, in disc form, CD-ROM, DVD-ROM, as reminders that the digital actually consists of multiple phases of so-called evolution, and is not limited to particular soft or hardware or materiality. So I talk about the different phases of the electronic, and ultimately I take an apparatus agnostic approach. And I also am very engaged with issues of preservation and access, which I was very aware as I started writing the linear form of the research. And I realized that even though writing is a very important means of preserving the history of constantly disappearing media and their platforms, and we're doing a problem that is not just an old problem. We actually see this, it's a very common problem, even with some very notable, influential interactive documentaries, for instance, that I discuss. Sometimes the discussion forums that are very important retrospectively, they totally disappear. The platforms are not maintained and so on. So for me, it was very important to, alongside the writing and the research, to create non-traditional and at the time low budget or no budget and low tech resources to actually preserve the histories of this media, to reflect on ways of both respecting some of their transient qualities, but also preserving certain aspects that are necessary for media history without forcing totality. So for the sake of time, I'll just briefly, I took screenshots of some of my collaborative websites. This is more of a teaching and studying archive of various interactive media. It's over a decade old, no budget. And more recently, I have a more an NYU-backed version of the original blog that I started as I was getting into interactive cinema again over a decade ago. It's called 𝗓𝗏𝗏, where it's sort of an expansion of the book that now includes submissions from the artists themselves, from several archives and institutions, and eventually, along with my students and an exhibition that I'm curating this coming fall, we're going to have actual emulators of some of the CD-ROM and DVD-ROMs because we have a growing collection in the cinema studies department at NYU. So I want this to be a kind of expanding ecosystem that will also ultimately include this new project that I'm working on with Eric Lawyer, which I'm sure many of you know. And we are trying to kind of create this project where you will not only get access to nearly obsolete forms of interactive cinema, but also we want to make the difficulties of access more transparent. And this is a little bit wordy because we're still in the thought process. This is Eric's vision in combination with some of my concepts from the book. But we basically want users to access older new media in fragmented ways, play around with sound, with the tactile qualities. We're trying to figure out ways to include smell and taste into this. And it's going to be a playful way of remixing some of the components. So we're going to be preserving this media in the form of remix, if that makes sense. And it will be a way for also students and scholars to do a deeper dive. So this is the prototype right now. I know it doesn't give a full idea, but we're working closely with the artists themselves and some of this media from the 90s, early 2000s. So it's an opportunity for the artists who were doing this kind of work in a very experimental way. There was no specific rigid academic ideology associated with interactivity. So they're less binary in their approach to interactivity, more experimental, playful, multimodal, post-human in a again, pre-theoretical form. So the artists themselves are revisiting their work through this experimental approach. So hopefully I will have more updates next time we meet next year on this project. And I'm gonna end here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marina. Yes, IFM next year, we will see you there. Yeah, I love it how you intertwined, the mode of the medium itself and the modalities of the medium with also the politics and what interactive cinema is about. So that is really interesting. Yeah, fabulous. And thank you all for all the virtual applause. There's one thing about online conferences, there is no actual applause, but you do get virtual applause. Thanks very much. So I think we'll do all the presentations and then sort of take questions together, like a round table, if that's okay. That's how we're going to do it. We're going to take all the presentations and then we'll do questions together. So we'll move now to Jose. So 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗏 is a filmmaker and senior lecturer in media production at Bournemouth University in the UK. His work has been published in academic journals, newspapers, and other publishing venues, as well as screened and exhibited internationally. So Jose's main research interests revolve around the study of audience, citizen and community participation in relation with new technologies and digital media, and applied to a wide range of sectors from the creative industries and practices transmedia interactive storytelling, game studies, and immersive media to social justice, public health communication, education, and the political sphere. So his second monograph, Participatory Worlds, The Limits of Audience Participation, which is the book to be presented today, was published by Routledge in October 2023. So welcome, Jose. Thanks very much for being here. And over to you on Participatory Worlds.
Right. Can you see the screen?
We can, yes. And now it's come through. Awesome.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. Also, thank you to organize the conference for hosting such an interesting presentation, and for giving me the opportunity to talk about my second monograph, Participatory Worlds, The Limits of Audience Participation. Apologies in advance if you cannot hear me very well, because I need to speak a little bit slow today. There are people already sleeping next door, but I will try to make you understand what I'm going to explain here. Well, first of all, I'm going to give some quick facts about the book. By the way, you're going to see plenty of pictures of my cat today. So the book was published by Routledge in October last year as part of the book series Routledge Advances in Transmedia Studies. The book is aimed to media practitioners, scholars, and students interested in transmedia storytelling, fandom, world building, and world sharing, media production, literary studies and comparative literature, new media and digital culture, audience research, community building, gaming, and media studies. This book is an in-depth analysis of participatory worlds, practices beyond the mainstream models of content production and IP management that allow audience members to contribute canonically to the expansion of story worlds, blurring the line between the traditional roles of consumers and producers. In a more general context, the book provides a thoughtful study of the application of participatory culture in real-life settings, such as which enables meaningful consumer and audience participation instead of a superficial impact. For some readers, the text may hint at the incompatibility of participatory practices with media and entertainment conglomerates. He describes a significant number of challenges and limitations. Other readers instead may prefer to look at the book as an opportunity to learn about independent business models, which have been able to survive a market dominated by media giants despite the lack of resources. So allow me to take a step back and explain how all of this started. Now, this fresh chicken here is in the London Film Museum 11 years ago, where I attended a conference in which I presented a paper in fictional worlds, in MMORPGs, expanded through players' contribution. Players created background stories about the characters, made comics to portray their adventures, and write chronicles of their journeys. At the time, I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at. And it took me a couple of years to start giving shape to what it was going to become this book. And J.P. Wolf dedicated a couple of pages to participatory worlds in his book, Building Imaginary Worlds. And although he doesn't give details or clear examples, he defines the practice in this way. A participatory world allows an audience member to participate in the world's events and make permanent changes that result in canonical additions to the world. There are three key features that explain participatory worlds contained in this definition: audience participation, world expansion, and canonical contributions. This combination of these three features makes participatory worlds different from other practices. Participation is enabled through recognizable and enduring channels for participation for the actual audiences in the world. This is the main difference with ventures like What Lives Inside, Life in a Day, or Snakes on the Plane. World expansion occurs when audience contributions are incorporated to the story world, leading to its enhancement and growth. Participatory worlds are formed by multiple texts or episodes. This is one of the main differences between them and other participatory media practices, such as network books or collaborative writing. Canonical contributions are additions which have reached canon status, implying that they have been validated by the world net. as part of the official narrative that affect history and world features and potentially affecting future contributions to the world. This is different from fan fiction, fan bits, or commercial ventures such as 𝗓𝗏. So I came up with my own definition. Participatory worlds are fictional worlds that allow audiences to participate in the decision-making and content creation processes that result in canonical additions to the world. But not all participatory worlds are the same. Through the analysis of examples, I came up with two different models, the 𝗓𝗏 and the spin-off. Just in general terms, the 𝗓𝗏 model hosts the participatory practice within the core text, while the spin-off allows audiences to contribute through peripheral text. Some scholars before me talk about meaningful participation. Jenkins, Paul, and Green even wrote a whole chapter about it in spreadable media without getting anywhere. So I came up with a concept of intervention, which, as defined on the screen, is a high degree of agency given to audience members in contrast to more cosmetic ways to contribute. If not all participatory worlds provide the same degree of intervention, I designed a framework to understand how participation works and how participatory a participatory world is. The book looks at 4 case studies, which developed through different media. Bar Karma was a TV show broadcast by current TV in the US. Beckenfield was a web drama forwarded by theatrics.com. 𝗪𝗏𝗄 was an essay rooted in the world of Eric Flint's 1632. And Lord of the Craft is an MMORPG using Minecraft as its main platform. In the book, I also compare participatory worlds with other widely adopted practices and case studies, from media franchising logics to commercial MMORPGs and ACs. Some of the aspects I look at are how audience participation is enabled in the different layers of the story world, the strategies to entice audiences to the text and their consequences, the methods to obtain resources to ensure the sustainability of the project, the way that audience contributions and canonical content are managed, the methods to alleviate the barriers to participation and the tensions between amateurs and professionals, and copyright and hierarchies and how they affect opportunities for participation. So many of you have written or are in the process of writing books. So some of the thoughts that I'm going to share with you may resonate with you. It's a very time-consuming and energy-draining process, and more often than not, life stands on your way. I changed jobs, I got married, I had a son, and I adopted my beautiful cat, the one that you have been seeing during the process. And it's normal that this slows you down. Don't panic. Asking for extension is a normal process. Don't feel bad about it. Just give enough notice. While writing this book, I needed to reduce considerably my chapters length. Publishers prefer more and shorter chapters than less and longer. They also want to sell the chapters separately, so they will need to introduce, you will need to introduce acronyms and provide references in every chapter. There were so many changes in the structure that I needed to do, particularly because I wanted to change the order of the chapters that they was originally written, with some later changes. And that was also changing part of the narrative. And then, because writing takes a long time, some of the details you write in the book may become obsolete. Sometimes you just embrace it. Other times you need to keep updating the content. Remember that the internet is ephemeral. What is one day there may not be the next. So do local backups and archive websites, and review very carefully your proofs when sent it to you, as it may contain significant errors. So writing a book is an arduous and lengthy exercise, which is pretty pointless unless people read it. So please recommend this book to your faculty librarian. If you are interested in writing a book review to a journal or simply want to have a chat about research, just throw me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose, and beautifully timed. Yes, thank you very much. And I love the I take it that was your cat. That was Puri, right? The cat.
Yeah, that's
so your your tributes to those who support you as well. through this writing. Yeah, it's interesting how you and also Marina, the way you sort of grappled with the content of your medium, different ways in your books. I mean, I know Marina expanded it through, your other projects, but also just the way listening to how 𝗲𝗄 was also how you also like looking through and going through the content, the media, right? The ephemeral, the digital, the immaterial that we deal with in our materials and how we write about them. So that's very good. But we will keep questions and further explorations about that at the end. So moving very smoothly to our third speaker. Very glad to see you here, Nick, although it's Italian, I thought I told you the wrong time. But very warm welcome to Nick, our third speaker, Nick Jones, friend and fellow colleague at York. So Nick Jones is senior lecturer in film, TV, and TV and digital culture at the University of York, UK. He's the author of Hollywood action films and spatial theory, Spaces Mapped and Monstrous, Digital 3D Cinema and Visual Culture, and a range of journal articles and book chapters on cinematic space, VFX, and contemporary blockbuster aesthetics. So he is here to talk about GUI media, screen entertainment, and the graphic user interface, which was named runner-up Best Monograph in 2024 by the British Association of Film, Television, and Screen Studies. Yay, congratulations. He's currently gearing up a project on screen media and quantum physics, which I didn't know about, but now I do. So over to you, Nick, on GUI media.
Thank you, Jenna. And my huge apologies to not be able to be here for the full panel and to see other speakers. I just sort of jumped in at the end of José's. I, for reasons of weird confluence, was invited to speak about GUI media at another university at Warwick. So I've just done that and then checked into my hotel room. I thought I was going to be on time, but the hotel room booking was for a different month. So I wasn't actually booked in. So I had to have a 15-minute conversation with the people at the desk. So it's a little bit stressful, but I'm here now. So apologies for missing it, the rest of the panel. I've got sort of 7 to 8 minutes. Is that right, Jenna? I'll just start a timer. So yeah, thank you for having me and for inviting me to talk about the GUI media book. I'm gonna share just the, can I share? Yes, the cover or the website, Edinburgh University Press, just so that you have a sense of kind of, and you can see it great, of what I'm talking about. This is the book with its beautiful cover that was designed by a friend of mine who's a graphic designer. I made sure he got paid by the publishing company. It took a while, but we got there because I really wanted a bespoke cover, and I wanted a cover that was not like, I felt if the publisher made the decision, it would just be like a still from a film or a video game or a TV show or something like that. And the whole point of this book is that it is not prioritizing one media or the other. So the idea of just like, here's a film on the cover would have really got to me. So it's nice to have something that is expressing the book's idea, which is this idea of kind of GUI media and the GUI-ness of our contemporary digital screen media. So the argument the book makes is that we need to pay attention to the presence of the graphic user interface in the way we consume so much screen media today. So the graphic user interface, briefly, being the interface that most of us, if not all of us, use on our laptops, our computers, our phones, anything that has a kind of representational space with icons and folders. And we open up Chrome and then we can access Netflix, or we open up Steam and then we can access a video game. And we usually don't pay that much attention to this interface because as an interface, it's designed to give us access to the thing we actually want to watch, to that episode of Friends or to that new video game that we want to play. That's what we're focused on, not the platform that provides us that access. But GUI media, the book argues that we need to pay attention to that platform. It's called GUI media because the graphic user interface is, the acronym is GUI. So it's sometimes described as, or said out loud as a GUI. A graphic user interface is a GUI. And I love that idea. And once that was in place, I really kind of pushed that metaphor. And there's a lot of kind of language about stickiness and absorbency in the book, which I feel like isn't entirely frivolous. It's there because the fundamental idea is that this interface, computer interface, sticks a lot of our media together, i.e. we can use the same interface to engage with lots of different media tasks and watch, play, experience, and so on. And also that because the screen is so sticky, it leaves kind of viscous traces on the media that it comes into contact with. So a film that has been made by Netflix and released on the Netflix platform has kind of sticky traces of the interface because Netflix is a streaming platform that relies upon that kind of comes from or is used via the graphic user interface. So the argument is that this isn't just a neutral channel of media communication. It impacts the media that it's used to view, play, whatever. As you can see, it's hideously expensive because it's an academic monograph. So no one should buy it. But yeah, that's what university libraries are for. I'll just sort of scroll down to the sort of bullet points so that you have a sense of that, which is sort of what I've just been talking about. And yeah, I wanted to analyze and think about media in a kind of non-hierarchical way. I come from a film studies background, but it was really important to me that this book wasn't film studies that's then like dabbling in video games or TV studies. I wanted it to be kind of give everything the same weight, put everything on the same level. Whether I'm successful or not with that, I don't know. I'll let other people be the judge. But I found that a lot of the work that I looked at seems to prioritize, and it's usually cinema, right? It's usually like film studies and the models of how we analyze film are the priority. And then we like import them to other things, or we kind of look at other media through them. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something as non-hierarchical as possible. So in writing the book, because I know that's something that Jenna's asked us to talk about, and I'm glad because it's something that it's a conversation that I've been having. I'll just go down to like the chapters here. I made a very conscious decision when writing the book. So it's my third monograph. And I felt like I had license at this point to allow it to be more me. Whereas the previous books, you know, there's a book that was my PhD that I turned into a book, and I needed to write that to get a job. And then I was insanely lucky enough to get a postdoc. So the book of the postdoc research that was funded, it's like, okay, that book has to justify this enormous kind of generosity of the British Academy awarding me this postdoc. So it has to, and that was about 3D, and I had to take 3D seriously. Whereas this book was sort of just for me. And I leaned into that, and I wanted to write a book which was potentially fun. Again, I let other people be the judge as to whether I succeeded on that. But there were certain things that I read. So something like Jonathan Stern's book on MP3s, which is a tremendously good academic book, but wears its knowledge so lightly and is such a pleasure to read. And I thought, why don't I try and do that, or give myself space to explore that? So in terms of the writing process, what I really got out of this book was allowing it to have my personality, which I think is a little bit sometimes iconoclastic. It's terrible to describe oneself that way, but like a little bit playful and trying to use metaphor in a way that is enlightening, but also kind of helps readers track kind of potentially complex ideas in fields that they're not familiar with, because it's such a kind of interdisciplinary book. And letting myself creatively kind of explore that, and also kind of different topics. Like you can see there's a chapter on sound. So not chapter 3, listen mode. I'd never worked on sound before, but I was reading material in sound studies that I just loved. There was something about the way certain fields, certain scholars within the sound studies field describe music and the sonic quality of certain things. I just thought that is such a pleasure to read. I want to explore that in my own writing. So the wonderful thing about this book was that I gave myself license to do that. I didn't say, no, these things are off limits. It has to do this. It has to sort of be a very serious academic monograph that ticks these boxes. I think it does tick the required boxes of a monograph, but also it was a sort of experimental place for me to have fun and yeah, take things seriously, but no. So a friend of mine once described my teaching as I take what I do seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. And I think this book is an expression of that. I really wanted, this is serious stuff, but it doesn't mean it has to be kind of leaden. It can be light. And yeah, again, I feel very self-conscious claiming that it achieves this, but that was the goal. And I'd never reflected on what my writing was supposed to do in that way before. And I really enjoyed doing that for this book. So there we go. Thank you, Jenna. I'll stop there.
Beautifully timed again. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, well, the thing about online conferences is that we just give you either a mimed applause or virtual applause. No actual applause, but that was great. Thank you very much, all three of you, Nick, Marina, and Jose. I have quite a lot of questions in my mind. Questions of voice. Nick, I thought that was very well brought up. And I think every author has to resolve that within themselves, what kind of voice, how they want to speak, how they want their book to speak, at what stage of their careers do they want their books to sound a certain, all of that I think is very, very pertinent, but also as well, what you were trying to present in terms of your subject matter, not so much in terms of medium as with the others, but in terms of how you were framing it, how you're presenting it, and how you're speaking it. But I will see if there are any questions from the audience. It is the last session of the day, so we want to finish strong. Leah, I see a hand from you.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
thanks, Jenna. I really enjoyed all of these presentations. I'm excited to be in this historical moment where we have book release talks, because I felt like everyone was really able to be focused and compelling about their topic, which is unsurprising, I suppose. I have a specific question for Marina, but then I have a second question for the whole group. The first question for Marina is, could you tell us a little bit about the artists whose work you are sort of remixing and what their thoughts are about returning to those works and about having it in, say, maybe a different form or format?
Yes. So actually in the book itself, I'm very transparent about the fact that some of the case studies are based on what was retrievable, right? Since I'm not trying to say this is a comprehensive range. So for the last project that I mentioned, the experimental kind of remediation of CD-ROM, interactive cinema in particular, I picked some artists that I had corresponded with at length. Some are also, they became friends through this journey. And the initial 3 that I picked in consultation with Eric Lawyer, they each present different definitions of interactivity. So the first one is called Shock in the Ear. It's from 1997 by Australian artist Noreen Newmark. So I wanted them to be from different cultures as well, from different countries. And Australia, I feel like it's usually a little bit underrated, at least since I'm in the US. Within the US, not many people know about Australian interactive CD-ROM art, but there's a whole tradition that's very diverse. So working with Nori on this first kind of iteration of the prototype, she was very interested in reapproaching this work that is, as the title Shock in the Ear implies, it's more sound driven rather than tactile interactivity or choose your own adventure. And it's very abstract. So you have to come up with your own instructions, let's say your own guidelines. So we thought, what if we remix the whole soundscape, which is very layered, and see what we come up with. And also, this particular work has to do with traumatic stories. Some have to do with personal trauma. Others have to do with cultural shock and so on. So we're in the phase where we're trying to incorporate concepts from the book. For instance, Melanie Swalwell's idea of unmixed media and my concept of composite aesthetics, where different elements coexist, but they don't merge together holistically. So we want to use that as our guiding principle. Our second case study is going to be Masaki Fujikata's impalpability, that repurposes how a mouse was traditionally used, and it asks users to flip it over and use the ball of the mouse to control the interactivity. So we want to see how can we remediate that in obviously the touchpad or something that is not reliant on the old school version of the mouse. So for that, we're going to play with tactility. Then we have Tony Dove, who created one of the first prototypical AI. This is early 2000s, and it uses voice commands. It's called Sally or the Bubble Burst. And the fourth one is called Killer Berlin, which I'm kind of excluding from some grant applications because of the name, but it has to do with post-reunification Berlin and different artists from different parts coming together in Berlin and playing a game. So yes, and for that, we're gonna play with multimodal interactivity. So we have different case studies that explore different senses for deliberately. And also, as I briefly mentioned, I am curating an exhibition. It's mainly going to be CD and DVD-ROM media. So that's also gonna kind of show me where what people gravitate towards. We're gonna have a virtual version of that exhibition. So we're already gonna be troubleshooting some of the things that have to do with the difficulty of archiving interactivity, how do we mediate it, but also not fully simulate it, and so on. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that was fascinating and helpful. The follow-up question I want to ask is, you reminded me that you said about smell and taste. Can you give us a taste of what that will be like?
Not yet, because that's one of our biggest issues. So how do we remediate? But I will say I want to do something that will be a tribute to scratch and sniff. So that was my idea of incorporating it, but not mechanically, obviously reproducing it. So yes.
Thank you, Marina. Always a lot going on your plate.
It's hard to condense this answer.
I understand, yeah. And also, but great titles that you gave. Leah, did you say you had a question for the group, or?
Yeah, I wanted to hear, I guess, I apologize to Nick, but I guess I wanted to hear from Jose and Marina about their thoughts about the other books. So that was my question, but it can also wait since I see other hands were up.
Chair's prerogative. Also, I'll table that maybe a little bit later on. Let's hear from Logan first then. Logan,
Thank you. I might be asking this in an oblique way, but Nick, I was struck by something you said and listening to the others speak about their processes and their books as well. And partly that was, you know, as a doctoral student myself and thinking about my own writing practices, the way that you talked about the journey to your third book and then your approach partly sounded like you were taking that approach for personal reasons, that you wanted this to be an expression and maybe even more of a pleasure to write. I'm not sure, but certainly the way you described the reading experience reminded me of something like the term generosity, and how there's like a certain amount of theory that, you know, we know that we sort of struggle through, that it's important and interesting, but it's not always particularly generous to readers. What you're doing with GUI media, it sounds like, is sort of oppositional to that, of it's meant to be enjoyable to engage with the ideas. And I don't know if you'll appreciate this reference or not, but it reminded me of when I was doing my MFA and I read 𝗍𝗵𝗂𝗃 for the first time. That he sort of he lobbed out these grenades, but in a way that was so pleasurable to read that I found myself consuming his writing in a way that sometimes I saw a stack of books on my desk that were on my to-do list. So anyway, in the thinking about criticality and generosity as this sort of balancing act, I wasn't sure if you could speak a little bit to that, and then also the other two writers as well, because I'm sure, this makes it across our brains at different moments in our process.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Logan. And yeah, that word generosity is exactly what I would like people to feel. Like, again, it's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, like, I don't subscribe to is it Judith Butler, where it's like the only certain language is sufficient to explore ideas of this complexity, and like, I don't agree. Something that someone once said to me about examples within a text, like if you're kind of talking about a kind of high theory idea, or even, just a theory idea, that you should always kind of challenge yourself to put an example in, and that those function as, like, if you're looking at a map, it's like a "you are here" dot, and like it helps you read the map and the territory and know where you are on the journey. And I've always, like, every time I'm writing something, the moment it starts to kind of edge towards a kind of grand statement, or like a kind of, yeah, like the digital is this, it's like, okay, no, for example, put it into concrete practice, pin it down for the reader, because they might not have the same kind of reference points, or they might not be going with your ideas. So to offer a concrete example is perhaps itself a concrete example of, like, my attempts to be generous. Yeah. Which I think is, yeah, a good thing, a good way of framing it. But also I'm very conscious that it comes from a place of, for me, kind of immense privilege, in that I'm writing my third book, and I have a job, so I don't need this book to get me a job or to do other things. I'm writing it because I'm lucky enough to have research time, and this is what I want to do with it. So I appreciate that that's not like, oh, everyone should do that, like, because sometimes there's a much more instrumental kind of framework around you, but it certainly made it a more enjoyable experience, and yeah, like a more me kind of experience. It feels like the book I have the most ownership of, for sure. So yeah, thank you for that question and comment.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult one. Jose, I was wondering whether you want to come in on this, because it is a very tricky question, and I think it's worthwhile hearing different perspectives to Logan's question.
Well, I guess that when I was starting to write in academic writing in general, I was taught that whatever I write, my grandmother should understand it. Unfortunately, my grandmother didn't speak English, so I couldn't really test it. But it's important to make books accessible, and it's not a question of using cumbersome terminology and try to show that we are very deep in our thoughts. What is important is that people really understand what we mean and make the argument clear. And I think that having that in mind, it's challenging the way that we write sometimes. but Nick is right. Sometimes depends on your own situation. You need to write a book because you need to get a job. You need to write a book because you have the ref coming, and they are pushing you to do it, or it's one of the outputs that you promised to the funder, and you need to actually get something done. Not always writing a book is pleasure, and it's not really something that you enjoy, because again, as I said before in my presentation, there are some things that come on your way, and you need to prioritize. And sometimes, there is little time. You need to get the work done, and I understand what Nick says about the way that you are normally planning to do things. Okay, let's try to do this in the way that I would like to do it. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes not, also depending on the circumstances. In my case, I guess that I was lucky because I was told from the very beginning from early drafts that it was really easy to read. And the only thing, it was too long. So I needed to shorten it. But I think this is something that probably we should all try to make our text accessible to everyone, not only to researchers, and try to use very complicated words. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, one of the things I was always told is like, well, the whole point of academia is to invent to coin new terms. And I'm always not doing that. I'm completely opposite. I said, oh, why am I going to do that if someone else already wrote about this? I mean, we can just try to have a discussion about it. It's going to be easier if I'm just taking that term, because otherwise you're confusing people. I mean, many people talking about the same thing but calling it differently is one of the things that probably confused most of the readers. So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Absolutely. No, there are a lot of things you are supposed to do as an academic and in academia. And part of actually this whole career is to work out which spaces you can negotiate and in which you can't. But that is hard as well. But thank you very much. I'll move swiftly to Stefano. Hudson, you had a question and then you chickened out. So I will. No, I'm joking. I'll leave you not to. But Stefano first, because he's been waiting for a while.
No worries. Thank you all for the presentations, for the books, mainly for the books. Amazing work here. I don't have a question. I just wonder if you could have some advice or tips for the IFM community about the corpus, the materials that you're working with. We're all working with interactive media, kind of cutting-edge technologies, and including myself. And what I find very difficult, not only with books, but I think PhDs as well, thesis, dissertations, all those kind of extensive productions. How can you control the materials in a way? Because they're fast evolving, they're very dynamic. Every single day there is something new coming up. We change trajectory all the time because we get interested in the latest technology, the latest tool, the latest toy, whatever. And especially in our field, especially for us in this community, I was wondering if you see that, if you had that issue yourselves, first of all, if you have any tips, any advice for everyone else in this community, because personally, I see that as a problem all the time. So thank you.
Yeah, good question. I'll take it around, but Nick first, since you raised your hand.
Thanks, Jenna, and thanks, Stefano. Yeah, I raised my hand just because my kind of instant reaction is like to not buy into any marketing or kind of larger industrial discourse hype, and like step as much as you can outside of that and look at like the kind of bigger picture. There's one moment in 𝗂𝗎 in the conclusion where I create an AI generated image. I think I use Midjourney. And it's a pretty kind of flippant point, but I'm conscious that already, like between submitting the manuscript and it being published, like that 4-month period, that image and the way I talk about it, albeit briefly, is already out of date because AI image generation had moved on so considerably in the meantime. And I think that's fine in the book, but it was a reminder, like, don't think that what happened yesterday is going to still be kind of read in the same way in 6 months' time. So try and kind of step back from that, step back from how people are describing this new exciting thing, and try and look at the kind of bigger flow, bigger picture is what I always try and do. So thanks.
Yes, we wing it a lot more than we admit we do, don't we? Let's finish up with the round. I think this is a good question to finish up. So maybe Marina and then Jose.
Yeah, I agree with Nick, and also I never buy into the novelty discourse. And the way I define interactivity, and this applies to immersion, AI, is not technologically oriented, because there could be the next big thing, the next technology, and so on. So I look at interactivity, as I mentioned, from a phenomenological perspective, multicultural, cross-cultural, ideological perspectives, from the desires that are embedded in creating something that is participatory. And actually for my book, I went back and I revisited some very early articles that I wrote on interactive cinema. Some are from like 10 years ago. And even though now interactive cinema has evolved, we have Bandersnatch and Netflix and so on, I was still comfortable with the arguments I was making, because it was never just oriented around the novelty of a particular technology or the commercial discourse or the hype of the new and so on. So it's sort of an apparatus agnostic approach, I would say, for me.
Iconoclastic. Yeah, we're supposed to come up with a one word at the end of this session, so that's going to be my word. Yeah. Jose, quickly, if you want to add to this.
Thank you, Stefano, for the question. I think that also depending on the approach that you want to take. I understand what Marina says, and particularly in the interactive media, it's everything very, very much related to the technology that is being used at the time. Then we can adapt it to the next new thing, and we can adapt it to the next new thing, but it doesn't really mean that the experience is actually the same. If you are focusing on the user experience, we can really look into certain things. If we are looking into the technology and the way, the process of making or the process of distributing or circulating it, we are looking at a different thing. I have seen through the years in different research projects, not necessarily only about this book. I have seen many, in the same way that Marina was describing it before, many technologies that they have come like it was going to be the next thing, and then they shut down, and then something else, something new is actually coming, and there are new projects coming, new exciting projects. There is always going to be something new. I think that the most important thing is, as I said before, the approach. If you are interested in the user experience, I mean, I remember David was talking before about 47 hours, 50 hours of an interactive documentary, and it's a really big commitment to watch all of that. We are actually expecting audiences to watch all of that or cherry pick what they are interested in. We need to try to probably understand what we want from it before, what approach we want to take, what's interesting for us, what's our goal, and try to be humble. We cannot really control what the next technology is going to be. We cannot really control if Flash is going to be discontinued, or if Microsoft is deciding to remove one new feature, and suddenly we don't have the tools. So we just need to carry on. I guess that the important thing is the approach that we are taking.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you.
Integrity. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you all.
Thanks. So Hudson, you have your hand back up again, or not? Burning question?
No,
Or-
because you're running out of time, like you said. So
We are a little
we
bit.
can go to the one word activity.
Are you sure? Are you sure? I can do a chair's prerogative and give you space for your question. But we can also go to the one word exercise now.
Yeah.
Okay, it is time. Great. So a feature of the IFM 2024 conference is to paste in the chat. We're not doing the poll, right? So with the paste in the chat, one word or phrase that you have taken, there you go, from this conversation into your conference experience. So if we all take 15 seconds to put the one word in the chat, we will collect all of this and as a snapshot of the conference, but also importantly as a tribute to Patty Zimmerman, whom we're honoring this year in this conference, who has been a massive influence on the conference and on the community and on many of us in this space and in this area. And she's done so much and affected us so much. So we want to use this approach to honor her in a way which we think is characteristic of her generosity and the way that she's always engaged with us. So the words are coming in. Thank you very much. Hudson, can I hand this over to you now then? So I'll conclude the session. Thank you very much to our three speakers. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Nick, for sharing your insights and for sharing your work with us. This has been a wonderful session to chair. As I said, it's also for the history of the conference. So I'm very honored by this. I think this will be very useful for the community as well as a recording.